Mapping the first global war, the 7 Years' War. What if I told you that one war fought over 7 brutal years changed the course of history across 4 continents? The 7 Years' War wasn't just a European conflict, it was the first truly global war, setting the stage for today's world. The 7 Years' War didn't just happen overnight, though. It resulted from growing tensions and the ambitious goals of European monarchs who were eager to redraw borders and assert their dominance. Imagine it was like a high-stakes chess game where the main players were Austria and Prussia. Austria's ruler, Maria Theresa, was determined to reclaim Silesia, a region very rich in resources that had been lost to Prussia during an earlier conflict. She was adamant about restoring Austria's power and prestige. On the other side of the board was Frederick II of Prussia, also known as Frederick the Great. He had no intention of giving Silesia back, and in fact, he saw this as a prime opportunity to not only hold onto the territory, but also to weaken Austria and expand his empire. The lead up to the 7 Years' War was like watching a massive game of musical chairs over in Europe, where long-standing alliances were suddenly turned upside down. Britain, who had always been in Austria's corner, suddenly made a shocking move by switching sides and teaming up with Prussia. But this wasn't just a minor diplomatic shuffle, it was a seismic shift that sent shockwaves across the continent. France, who had been working alongside Prussia, was completely blindsided. Imagine the panic as French diplomats scrambled to secure new alliances. In a twist of irony, France ended up partnering with its old enemy, Austria. This unexpected flip-flop of alliances became known as the Diplomatic Revolution, a term that captures really just how dramatic these changes were. But the chaos doesn't stop there. Russia and Sweden, seeing the new power dynamics, decided to jump into the fray as well. Russia, eyeing Prussia as a key rival, threw its lot in with Austria and France, while Sweden joined in with its ambitions. Suddenly, the entire continent was on the brink of war, with alliances that had once seemed unshakable now crumbling. This reshuffling of alliances created a highly unsuitable situation, where old friends were now enemies and former rivals were suddenly allies. The stage was set for a conflict that would drag nearly every major power into a devastating and complex war, one that would eventually spread far beyond Europe's borders. When war erupted in 1756, Europe became a battleground where the stakes couldn't have been any higher. At the center of it all was Frederick II of Prussia, a ruler with a reputation for military brilliance. But Frederick wasn't just facing one enemy. He was up against a very formidable coalition of France, Austria, and Russia, all of whom had their sights set on taking him down. Despite being outnumbered, Frederick's Prussian army was highly disciplined and known for its precision on the battlefield, which became its greatest asset. One of Frederick's most stunning victories came at the Battle of Rossbach in 1757. Here, Frederick pulled off a masterstroke, using a swift and unexpected maneuver to crush a much larger French and Austrian force. It was the kind of victory that cemented his reputation as a military genius, showing the world that Prussia, despite its small size, could still stand toe-to-toe with the great powers of Europe. While Europe was caught in the chaos of war, the conflict spilled over into North America, where Britain and France were locked in a fierce struggle for control of the continent. Imagine the vast wilderness of North America, with its dense forests and sprawling rivers, becoming a battleground where European powers fought not just each other, but also sought the support of the Native American tribes. The French, who had long cultivated better relationships with many of these tribes, initially had the upper hand. Their alliances with tribes like the Shawnee, Huron, and Algonquin gave them critical support in their efforts to hold onto their territories. Britain had a secret weapon of its own, though: numbers. With a much larger colonial population, Britain could draw on a more substantial pool of troops and resources. As the war dragged on, this advantage began to tip the scales in Britain's favor, and by 1759, Britain had managed to turn the tide. The pivotal moment came with the capture of Quebec, a dramatic and decisive victory that effectively ended French control in Canada. This victory didn't just mark the end of French ambitions in North America, but it also signaled a major shift in the balance of power on the continent. But the 7 Years' War wasn't confined to Europe and the Americas. It reached to the Indian subcontinent, where the stakes were really just as high. Britain and France, already fierce rivals in Europe, found themselves locked in another struggle, this time for control over India's lucrative trading ports. The Indian subcontinent was a rich prize, and both powers knew that whoever controlled these ports would have a significant edge in global trade. One of the most dramatic moments in this theater of the war came at the Battle of Plassey in 1757. You had Robert Clive, a British officer leading a relatively small force of British and Indian troops. On the other hand, the Nawab of Bengal, Suraj-ud-Dowlah, commanded a massive army that seemed poised to crush Clive's forces. But Clive wasn't just relying on brute strength. He had a few tricks up his sleeve. Through a combination of clever tactics and a well-placed bribe to one of Nawab's key commanders, Clive managed to turn the tide of the battle. The 7 Years' War wasn't just fought on land, though. It also raged across the world's oceans in a series of fierce naval battles that were every bit as crucial as the land campaigns. Britain, with its formidable navy, took full advantage of its maritime strength to challenge French dominance on the seas. At the time, the British Navy was arguably the most powerful in the world, and they knew how to use it. The strategy was simple but effective: cut off French supplies and prevent reinforcements from reaching their colonies. One of the key theaters in this naval conflict was the Caribbean, a region rich with sugar plantations and other valuable resources that both Britain and France were desperate to control. The British Navy launched a series of aggressive operations in this area, aiming to weaken French influence and secure these crucial territories for themselves. In one of the war's most significant naval victories, British forces captured Havana in 1762. This wasn't just a win over the Spanish, who had allied with France. It was a strategic masterstroke that further crippled France's ability to sustain its global fight. The impact of these naval battles wasn't limited to the Caribbean, though. By dominating the seas, Britain was able to isolate French colonies across the globe, from the Caribbean to India. This naval superiority allowed Britain to disrupt French trade routes, cut off essential supplies, and prevent reinforcements from reaching beleaguered French forces. This relentless pressure on French supply lines began to take its toll, weakening France's ability to continue the fight on multiple fronts. After 7 long years of brutal battles and shifting alliances, the world was exhausted. The 7 Years' War had pushed nations to their limits, draining resources and leaving countless lives shattered. By the early 1760s, everyone was ready for the fighting to end. Finally, in 1763, the Treaty of Paris was signed, bringing this global conflict to a close. This treaty wasn't just a piece of paper, it reshaped the map of the world. Britain came out as the big winner of the war. They didn't just win the battles, they won vast swaths of territory. Under the terms of the treaty, Britain gained control of Canada, securing their dominance in North America, and they also took Florida from Spain and grabbed key parts of India, which would lay the foundation for the British Raj. These gains marked the beginning of Britain's rise as a global empire, with colonies stretching across the globe. But as triumphant as Britain seemed, this victory came with a hefty price tag. The war had been incredibly expensive. By the time it was over, Britain's national debt had skyrocketed. To pay off the debt, the British government decided to impose higher taxes on its American colonies. It seemed like a reasonable solution at the time, but it didn't go over well with the colonists. The increased taxes, particularly without giving the colonies any say in how they were taxed, sparked outrage. The discontent would eventually snowball into the American Revolution, changing the course of history yet again. So what are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comments below.